well, let's really think about this. Because when someone is acting in a way that is not what you were expecting, what that typically tells us is that they have different goals than what you're thinking about, because our behaviors directly align with what our goals are. So I sat back and I started thinking about these businesses, and I asked myself, what are their goals? What is it that they're trying to do that is leading them to behave in this way? And their goals were not to be the biggest, the best, as fast as possible. They had a lot of other goals. And many of them wanted to have something for their family. They wanted to be able to have the evenings and weekends off. And if that meant that they weren't going to make as much money, they didn't care. And they wanted to be an important part of the community and give back. And if that meant they weren't going to be the biggest and the best, that's okay. I had some businesses that they would close their entire restaurant for 2 weeks every summer just so they could ensure that their employees got a holiday. That's not going to get you to be the biggest and the best, the fastest, is it? No, and that's okay. What I realized is that a lot of these businesses have different goals, and what the owner wanted for their business was being demonstrated in what the business was doing. And so we call that ownership strategy. Now, when you all think of strategy, you probably think of business strategy. Has anyone done any business strategy classes for your school? Seen a few head nods. She says, I don't have time. I respect that. There's a lot. But when we talk about it, you're probably going to see some things that you recognize. So with a business strategy, we're often talking about how an organization plans to create value within your industry. And that's your market, your customer, your product. So for you all, your schools, you probably service a specific region. Yeah? So you have a set market, you have a customer, you probably know what types of students that you want to serve, and you have a product. You probably have a very specific curriculum that you follow, and that likely is what makes you distinct. And so you know that. You know what is adding value in your industry. And that's great. And that's because this is essential for your business success. You have to know what you're doing and who you're doing that for in order to be successful. However, the problem here is that puts your personal success directly related to your business success. Is that really fair? Are you guys only your business, or are you more complex than that? Yeah, you're more complex. You are your business, and yet you're still more complex, right? So there's a lot of things going on about you as a person that may not be reflected in this. Additionally, this is grounded in corporate strategy, big businesses. And the way that big businesses do things tend to be a little bit different than small businesses and how they do things. Because first off, you don't have enough employees, right? You are the HR department. You are the marketing department. If someone has a complaint, they call you. So doing all of that is different. And so acknowledging that this is different and that small businesses need to act differently is incredibly insightful for me. And that is when I would say I fell in love with working with small businesses, is because they do things differently. And a lot of that is because of their ownership strategy. And so this is how you as a business owner plan to create value for yourself. So what are you doing to create a legacy? What is your legacy when you leave your business? What is your legacy when you leave this world? What are you doing to create value for your family? What about your community? And so these are all things that you as owners, especially as small business owners, are probably thinking about regularly. And that is part of your ownership strategy and what you're wanting to get out of your business. And this is important because it acknowledges that you are more than your business, that your success is not just the success of the business, but your success may be employing people and giving them 2 weeks of vacation every summer, and they've never had that in their life. And that's kind of a big deal. And that should be celebrated just the same as being the biggest and the best and the fastest, because you are doing things that make you happy, that bring a lasting legacy that impacts your family and impacts your community. And I think that's beautiful. And so this whole philosophy of thinking about an ownership strategy tends to be grounded in family business theory. And Robert and I both study family businesses. We're both very passionate about small and family businesses, because some family businesses are really big, but we tend to have a special place in our heart for the small one. And this is because in family business theory, we often talk about the owners of the the goals of the owners. And so if you think about what you're doing in your school, you likely have goals that are other than being the biggest, the best, and the fastest. And those things come from what we call socio-emotional goals, so things that are not necessarily monetarily related. And so while business strategy is incredibly important because you have to have a good business strategy in order to be a successful business person, you also need to know what your ownership strategy is. I keep forgetting it's on this side. So let's talk a little bit about developing an ownership strategy. It's a lot. There's a lot of moving parts, and it is quite the process. But let's talk kind of high level of what this looks like. And I want you all to ask yourself the question, what are the next steps for your business founders? What are the next steps for you and your school? How many of you founded the school that you work in?
Awesome.
Incredible. What's your next steps? What do you want to do to diversify? Are you trying to get more employees? You want to keep doing it all yourself forever? She says, no. So what are you going to do to grow? What kind of thoughts do you have? What's going to happen if you sell your business? If you sold your business as a person of one.
It could be down there.
Oh, I thought they were joining us. I was like, you have a plan. You already have thought about selling. I love an exit strategy. So what happens if you sell? Will your business still survive? If you retire, can you retire, or are you just going to keep getting pulled out of retirement? Is there a beach waiting for you to sit at, or are you going to just continually be coming back? How many of you have thought, I want to keep this business in my family? Is that something you all have thought about? I want to train up my kids, and I want to build that legacy. Oh, we have a couple. I love that. So when we think about these next steps, that's kind of getting us in this mindset to think in the future. Think about what we want and what our goals are going to be long term. But keep in mind, your easy solutions only solve easy problems. That's a struggle. So you might say, hey, I'm going to diversify. That's going to help us grow. I love it. But what happens if you diversify, you sell a little bit of ownership, slowly you start to dilute your control, and then you say, oh my gosh, I'm no longer running my business. I got kicked out. Is that scary? Are you okay with that? Are you willing to? No. They say no. We're not even going to talk about that. Skip that one, Sarah. Move on to the next one. Okay, well, what if you sold your business? There was another school and you're like, hey, I love what they're doing. I'm ready to retire. I'm going to sell my business. What happens if you sell your identity? Who are you if you're not your school? Oh, that's kind of scary. We should be more than our school, but that's a big part of your identity. What if you want to pass it on to your kids? You mentioned, bring the kids in. Are they already working with you? Not yet. Okay, dipping our toes in the water, right? We're working on it. Well, that's a lot of work because you have to train them and you have to kind of be extra nice to them because they are your kids and they'll yell at you and like an employee probably wouldn't yell at you. That's a ton of work. And we often see in family businesses this phenomena that we call shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. So you're the first generation, you've built it up. You're going to pass it to your kids. They've seen you build it up. They're going to help grow it. And then the 3rd generation, they may not be interested. They may sell it. They may close it. And so there's this cycle that we often see. It's hard to get past that 3rd generation. So there's a lot of difficult things going on here. So when we're talking about ownership strategy, you won't leave this room with a new ownership strategy, but we hope that you leave with some questions to help move in that direction, because this is hard. These are a lot of moving parts that don't have easy answers. And so you might be thinking, okay, you all said you're from family business. What does this have to do with our hybrid schools? What does this have to do with this ownership strategy? And so a couple things I want to point out about family businesses. The first is that family businesses are often successful because they leverage their social capital. How many of you all have a phenomenal network back home that helps you to get where you're going? You have the connections, the insights, you've made this, we call it social capital, that you can leverage to improve your school. Oh yeah, lots of people. You may or may not be a family business, but you're still using that social capital. And so that allows you to kind of take what we see in family businesses and apply it to what you're doing. Also, family business research, it's not out there to tell us what to do to be the best family business. And I bet a lot of you aren't out here competing with each other saying, I'm going to be a better school than you. You want to be a better school than you were a year ago, a better school than you were 5 years ago, right? And so what we often study is not how to be the biggest, the best, the fastest, but rather how to be better than you were and how to get to where you want to be. And so what you have to do while you're thinking about what should my strategy be, how should I run my school like a business, is aligning your goals and your purpose. So do you all feel like you have a purpose already in your school? Do you know what your purpose is? We're seeing some head nods, some maybes. Great. If I were to ask you, could you tell me what you're most proud of about your business?
That I started it.
Yes, I love it. What do you aspire to do as a business owner?
Encourage more people to start.
Yes, I love it. I love it. And then how do you encourage other people to collaborate and to work together? What are you doing to motivate and inspire?
Offload tasks that I would want to do with people.
Ooh, delegating. We call that empowering our employees to make decisions on their own. Yes, I love it. Motivate others, give them ownership. I like it. And then how do you determine what your value is, and how do you exercise the right to say this is what our value is? It's not to be the biggest, it's not to compete with the people in the room, it's to be better than I was a year ago. How do you do this? What is your purpose? And so as you're working through these questions, and I know you don't have solid answers to all of them in this moment, that's a lot, but as you're thinking about it, you're going to figure out what your goals are and ensure that they align with your purpose. If your goals have to do with ensuring that your employees feel like they get part of the business as well, maybe your goal is to empower them. Maybe your goal is to give them more tasks to be involved. If your purpose is to be a long family business, then your goals are, even though hard, to get your family involved and to help them find ways to love the business that you love. And so we have these owner goals that you might be thinking about. Anybody have any goals off the top of their mind that they're like, this is something I want to do with my business?
Create more jobs for people.
Ooh, create more jobs in the community. I love that. So that is helpful for both the business because you're growing, you have to be growing if you're creating jobs, but within the community. So you're finding a way to give back to the people that probably nurture you in some way. I love that.
More kids.
Serve more kids. Yes, I love that. So you're giving, you're helping. That's part of growing, but it's a little bit more specific.
Help the students to find their purpose.
Ooh, find their purpose. So that's not something that's really making money, right? That's not being a bigger, better, faster business, but that is leaving a legacy. And that legacy might not be a building, but it is the spark that is in all of those students that gets passed down. I love that. Those are beautiful. However, all of these really beautiful goals don't neatly translate into your business strategy, which is a little bit of a problem, you know? Like, you know that you want to do good business things, but how do I make these things work? And so we have what we call the ownership strategy triangle, and I love a good graphic. So with this triangle, there are 3 options, and you can pick 2. It's kind of like when you go to the mechanic with your car and they tell you your options are fast, cheap, or done well. You can have 2, so you can have it done well and you can have it done fast, but it won't be cheap, one of those things. You know what I'm talking about? Great, so that's very much like what we have here with our triangle. And so do you want to grow? Do you want to maintain control of your school? Or are you looking to kind of fund a little bit of a lifestyle? And so we have a couple of options, and there's good and there's bad with any of them. And I will never tell you what you should be. That is for you to decide. But I can tell you some things that we're going to see if you pick any one of these. So on the far right, we have our growth and control. And that's our stereotypical family business. That's mine and Robert's favorite. And what we see here is that businesses tend to grow through their retained earnings. So you're not going to pay out a ton of money. Y'all probably aren't making a fortune off of your schools. You're not paying yourself massively lucrative salaries. Instead, you're reinvesting that in the business, right? And the business is growing as a result of it. So you don't have a ton of this liquidity, but you have lots of control, which y'all seemed really excited about. We were not interested in giving up control at all. And you also have growth. So family business. But my question for you is, what does this mean for your debt? What does this mean for your lifestyle? You are your business. Good and bad. Our next option is liquidity and control. So this is our bottom line of the triangle. And this is our stereotypical small business, another favorite of mine. I love working with them. And what we often see is that they find something that they can do. Maybe it's a trend, maybe it's opening a restaurant, like a lifestyle business, and they just do that until they retire. And it's a beautiful thing. They go to work every day, they love their job, they love their people, and then one day they retire. But then I ask, what happens to the business after you retire? Like, do you just sell it? Do you close it? What's the long term? Did it ever really grow enough that you could sell it? I don't know. You're going to run into some struggles. And then our last one, growth and liquidity. I don't want to say these are my least favorite, but they are the ones I'm least likely to work with. I do have one group that I'm working with, but So liquidity and control, these are our new venture. I think of them as high growth tech startups. That's always where I go immediately. They are the unicorns. They want to grow rapidly. They are willing to dilute their equity, which I know you guys are not. Please don't come after me. But they will grow so quickly, they'll have a lovely exit, and they'll move on to something else. What does that mean for long-term ownership? They're likely going to get bought out. And that's okay, because that's what they wanted. And I'm not here to judge anyone or to say one is better than the other, but rather to say there are options, and I want you all to be aware of your options so that you can make better choices. So what we've covered so far, kind of a little highlight, little break. We've talked about a lot of things. Business strategy versus ownership strategy. Both are important, so we should talk about both. Some things that you need to think about when you're developing your ownership strategy, primarily, what is your purpose, and do your goals align with that purpose? And then we talked a little bit about the ownership strategy triangle, one of my favorites, and we'll talk about that again here at the end. So I'm going to transition now to Robert, who's going to not just tell us about ownership strategy, but why this is an important way to think about things.
Cool. Thank you very much. And I guess it's probably a good time if you want to hand out those handouts. Yeah. So, hello, my name is Robert Randolph. I work with Sarah in the Family Enterprise Center, though I'm a little bit of a different role because I'm the academic of the group. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about ownership strategy and some of my, from the outside perspective, feelings about hybrid schools with the hope that you can inform me where we're on the right track, where it can go. I am phenomenal at being interrupted. I am very good at being interrupted. So throughout this, I absolutely promise you, normal audience is MBA strategy students. So if we need to come to the middle, that's on me. So you let me know. I debated going through this. It took me a while to actually try to find out a little bit about how to best approach this. But I do want to give you a little bit of a background of how I'm thinking about ownership strategy specifically for hybrid schools. First off, my work is primarily on the research side. I'm a research professor. I'm a tenured professor at Kennesaw State. I coordinate PhD research. I coordinate data collections. I do a lot of membership surveys. And so a lot of my work is analytical, really more focused on large groups of businesses. And so more than any single business, which Sarah works a lot with individual businesses and developing individual owner strategies, most of my work is trying to look at large scales of populations and how family businesses, particularly the backbone of our economy, the small privately owned enterprises, which get a lot of attention, shallow attention, but not a huge amount of deep attention, can be informing the way that we do business. Was that a question?
No, I was going to ask for some of the flyers.
Oh, they're on the way.
So the biggest thing that is important when you're talking in family business, especially as a business school professor, is to remind ourselves that family businesses still are businesses. I'm still a business professor. I'm trained in strategic management and in finance, and I use these same tools for answering my problems. I think there is a lot of potential for coming up with new tools that exist outside of that. I've worked with family psychology professors and family science professors in looking at different ways of measuring outcomes and values and benefits. But I'm still a a business professor, and I love family businesses because of those distinctive aspects. Because not only do we have populations of firms that are run with family-centered values and goals, but they do so in a way that makes them not just survive, but more successful, inimitable, distinctive, building their own best practices and their own ways of informing industries that non-family businesses have to react to. And you might wonder, think about that and say, wait a minute, how can a family business be that different? Every CEO has a family. Every board member has a family. Having a family isn't what's unique. What's unique is that when you enter into a corporate governance relationship, you are beholden to the value that you're created for your shareholders. And so your teams are tethered by professional ties. And so what that becomes is, because all of that diversity and all of those great differences come together, we center around shareholder value creation, because that's what we can agree on. Just think about how hard it is to get you and people that you really like to agree on goals and aspects. Now imagine that you're total strangers working together for the betterment of a company. In family businesses, those behaviors look very different. And as a strategy professor, tapping into family dynamics has been one of the most enlightening parts of my career. Because what it's done is it reminds us that family businesses not only maintain their distinctiveness, but they thrive from it. So I'm going to give you a little bit of overview of what a stereotypical family business is, and I'd like to ask you to tell me whether or not it sounds like a hybrid school or not, whether it sounds relevant. So if we look at last year's McKinsey report on family business, the goals that Sarah was talking about, let's see if this sounds similar to yours. If we wanted to identify a family business, not by ownership, not by finances, not by wealth creation, but just by the goals of a business, we'd see something like this. A focus of outcomes beyond profit, a long-term strategic orientation, relatively long-term strategic orientation, a tendency towards financial conservatism when it comes to investments, and centralized decision-making, highly authoritarian decision-making, pyramidal types of hierarchies rather than horizontal collaborative hierarchies. Those goals look different between corporate governance and family business, but these goals don't look different when we look at household enterprises and household economics. In fact, we look very similar to what we would call a community enterprise or a household enterprise. And so the tactics that make successful family businesses successful also look different, because their goals are different, their capabilities are different, and their tactics are different. And so again, purely from the McKinsey report, we see a greater family businesses having a greater focus on collaboration, which sounds a lot like the meetings that I've had so far here in the hybrid school areas, of tactics that focus on a loss aversion even more than a maximum gains orientation, that financial conservatism, social processes built around the bonding of tight networks rather than the bridging of expansive networks. And finally, a cross-generational focus on value creation that gives them a chance to be more resilient and to sustain themselves over turbulent market conditions.
What does that mean?
What does what mean?
Can you re-explain the last
Yeah, so this would mean that resilience by focusing on investing in future generational outcomes. So rather than extracting wealth and so that you can invest on opportunities right now, it's reinvesting into long-term mechanisms. So this comes up through, I'm actually going to talk a little bit about generalized exchange in just a little bit. But yeah, it's that would be a reinvestment more than an extraction of wealth. So that's a very business school way of talking about it. But let me ask you, does that sound relevant to hybrid schools? When I scan the literature, or the scant literature on hybrid schools, it seems like a lot of the same questions underlying what makes family businesses distinctive seem very overlapping with what makes hybrid schools and micro schools distinctive, which makes me think that the capabilities are likely similar, which makes me think that the opportunities are likely similar, which makes me think that the strategies are likely similar. How are we feeling?
We were just saying that we've never studied any of this, but like we do all that.
I'm really glad to hear that. That's going to make the rest of this presentation so much easier.
So much stronger when we can do it intentionally.
Yeah. And having some guidance, showing that if you go and look at corporate high growth business practices, you might not get that support. But by reminding that you do have populations of role models. You might have to look for them, but those populations I think very well could be found in family business communities. We try.
We're on your team.
I'm glad to hear that.
If we need you, we're just contacting.
You let us know, and
That's what I heard, because we're extremely collaborative.
there it is, and so is family business. So that fits in with us. Go ahead.
We're contrasting the whole tight-knit kind of bonding with the desire to bridge larger networks, and I'm curious if you could give a concrete example of how bridging larger networks could focus on a purpose beyond profits. Like what would be an example? What would be a few examples of that? Because I mean, intuitively I like the bonding thing, but and the bridging larger networks kind of feels dispersed and sort of like diluted in a certain sense, but I have a feeling that there's more to it than that, so I'm curious to know to kind of get a sense of what that would look like from a purpose beyond profits standpoint.
Let me see if I can help you there. So the idea here would be in terms of that if we're thinking about a purpose beyond profit, empirically, we would measure that in ways such as job creation and economic impact, which is still revenue generated, or we can survey it in totally non-economic ways, such as socio-emotional wealth or effective returns through venturing. The focus on bonding tight-knit networks is not a dichotomy. The idea there isn't that you only focus on insular activities and don't focus on it. It's more of a staged progression where you pursue opportunities based off of your readily available network more so than you see an opportunity and say, hey, I need to get the expert there. And so I go out and hire an expert that's going to help me go right there and be very tactical. This would be more of the approach of, here's the network we already have. What opportunities can we pursue with our existing resources? And so that would be the strategic difference. Did that?
It does. I mean, so it's kind of a bottom-up type of thing.
Yeah.
But I guess, I mean, I guess I don't want to caricature the alternative as far as like,
right.
Kind of like, somebody who goes out and wants to make a franchise, or wants to create McDonald's, or like something really big, really fast. So I'm curious about what would be an example of a purpose beyond profits for someone who has that kind of mentality.
With that really expansive mentality? So probably, that's a good question. So if we go back to my really safe space of family businesses, the largest, most expansive and resource-laden family businesses still act like this, still have distinctive behaviors, right? The Walton families and the Walmart families and the Harley-Davidson families, those are all still parts of large family businesses, and they still have tendencies to act more towards this. In those cases, that looks more, that focus for intention beyond profit really goes more towards the what would maybe be considered a corporate social responsibility mission. And so in those cases, you'll often see family members heading up the foundations of those businesses, but not their governing boards. And so separating out those functions in a really large business, that separation becomes more important because the continued successful business functioning is what is allowing that foundation to exist. And so the shift moves to doing well by doing good, whereas the stereotype of the small business approach is doing well through doing good. And so it's a different way of evaluating what you do with those profits. So another way to think about this would be a community enterprise that is a for-profit business that fills its social mission by employing locally disenfranchised folks. They don't need to donate a lot of their money. The social mission is fulfilled by that functioning, whereas a large corporate entity trying to create that same good would likely dedicate some external philanthropy to it.
Yep. So if I'm hearing you correctly, from that perspective, the family business model might say, like, yeah, we're gonna be the family's gonna focus on the kind of heart of the business, you could say, whether it's the foundation or whatever, and then we're gonna kind of delegate out the more like growth and expansion aspect as far as, so we're not going to ever lose sight of that.
And so if we go back to that ownership triangle, that's a very normal way for families to achieve growth is through professional managers. Is once they reach a plateau, saying we're going to be investor owners, not owner managers, and we're going to instead leave the management of that business up to these professional teams, and then we're going to be in charge of what we do with the profits, so we can still fulfill our social mission. Totally.
Robert, can I offer an anecdotal
Please.
example? Am I good on the mic? Great. So, how many of you all are familiar with Dave's Killer Bread? Oh yeah. Why do you buy Dave's Killer Bread? Is it because it's tasty, or is it because of their social mission?
It's delicious.
It is very tasty. But for those of you that aren't aware, Dave's Killer Bread, they have a factory like any other place where you would make bread, but they hire formerly incarcerated individuals. And so that is their social mission, is to find ways to employ people who have a difficult time being employed. And so that is why we buy the bread, is because we support that mission. But if you're thinking about this bonding versus bridging, they're going to have to go out and make a lot of connections with people who are going to have access to those populations. Most likely, they don't have a large enough family or close network of formerly incarcerated people to only hire on those that they have bonded with. And so they go out, bridge with other people. Perhaps it is parole officers, perhaps it's like someone in the government, but there are local people that they will work with, create that bridging capital, and then find ways to hire those people. So that's kind of the social portion of it, but a one-off.
No, it's a good, as a phenomenal example. So,
Do you think our line of work though, as edupreneurs, there's already that social piece involved? Like, we want to make the world a better place through helping kids be their best selves, right? I mean, I think we probably all agree with that. Right, so that is itself, that is the mission.
and so that facilitates, that's why these networks are so important, because that bridging that you're experiencing, right, that's, this is an example of you bridging your networks, is so important because you see those similarities. And so hopefully, even if it's not everybody has that same mission, you're still able to see those patterns emerge so that you can identify relevant role models, relevant alternative methods, right? So you can develop your contingency strategies. And all of those things really help us with answering the same questions of ownership strategy. So it's an excellent point I can identify these distinctive goals. We can identify distinctive opportunities. We know that we're all different in our businesses, but we also know that there's a lot of overlap. And so the question becomes, just like why it's important to develop ownership strategies in tandem with business strategies, we also want to make sure that we're developing those ownership strategies in the right context. And so this is where I'm going to come in from a total outsider's perspective. In preparation for this, I took my same ownership strategy content and I dove into as much as I could find about hybrid schools, hoping to find something to help to talk about. I'm glad that we have some experts in the room to correct me if I'm wrong, but at any time, let me know, because again, this is from a total outsider's perspective. What I gathered when trying to come up with some strategic understanding of these contexts was that when you just Google what is a hybrid school and you look at everything from Cato reports to Forbes articles, what you essentially get is a very general definition, from my outsider perspective, not a technical definition, of any situation that combines in-person and hybrid learning. Are we talking about now when you look at that broadly, that combination, that screams to me that this is already a diversified industry. You've already are pursuing opportunities that exist both in the high value and best cost approaches. You're already saying, look, we could be a more economical solution. Awesome. We can be a greater outcome solution. Awesome. That means you've got chances to build those strategies. These types of diversification strategies, especially when you're competing against an entrenched monopolistic competitor like a public school system, they're successful when you can create synergies among them. Right? So if we think about the most successful disruptive businesses that we're seeing, the businesses, the startups that were able to disrupt established industries, we see that success coming from replication, from the ability to become just another school. That success comes from innovation. Those same companies that are pursuing that diversified approach, but they're doing it using redundancies, using replication, far fewer success. Your success trajectory gets way narrower because you're going into that challenged you're challenging that monopoly in their room, in their court. And you do not have an advantage. And so the advantage from these innovative strategies comes from being distinctive. And it sounds like, just from the little bits of conversations that I've had here and the little bit of reading I've done before this, that's exactly the questions that you're asking, is how can we not only maintain our distinctive strategies, but how can we capitalize on them? How can we scale them? How can we orient ourselves to maintain an innovative strategy and stop us from being sucked down into trying to compete as a bureaucracy? Because you'll never compete as a bureaucracy against an established bureaucracy. You needed to compete differently.
What's the synergies aspect of that?
So the synergies would be, in the most normal way, that synergy would be by being able to offer a product that is simultaneously more valuable and more accessible. Simultaneously an economic incentive because it's cheaper, and an outcome incentive because it's a higher quality.
I'm not sure if we can do the cheaper one. I'm not sure we can do the cheaper one.
Fair enough.
But that depends on how you explain that to parents and what resources you have to do that. Because one thing we're trying to get parents to do is to first see themselves as a customer of a service. That's the hardest hurdle, I think, for us, is for parents who've never paid for education to see that they have to pay for education. For a high-quality education.
Well, and they do from their taxes.
Pardon?
Well, they do pay for education, kind of. Anyway, yeah, I know that's a big topic. Yeah.
It's not translatable to a lot of people. So I just wanted to make that point. And I also just think, I'm not sure how other people feel, I just wanted to say this. I'm not sure everyone who's stepping out of traditional public education, whether it be former teachers or whatever, are really seeing this as an opportunity to innovate. I see a lot of people start schools because they're angry, they're mad at the bureaucracy. But being mad at the bureaucracy is not enough. Or
it's a starting point.
Yeah, that's a starting point.
Turn into something.
But they don't see themselves as disrupting, and this is about disruption.
Yes,
that's what innovation is about, disruption. And you have to get to that point and be angry and also excited that every day you get to walk into whatever your school setting is and innovate every single day. Change. Make it better. Make what you already know is not working to something that is working for kids.
You must have taken my strategy class at least one time, no?
I just want to offer maybe a converse perspective. I am doing it cheaper. I'm doing it for half as much as the public school district does in our community, I think that's very valuable.
Yeah.
And I am also, I was very angry at the bureaucracy, and that was what gave me even the room to have an idea. So I definitely think that the anger at the bureaucracy, it wasn't really anger, I just was intolerant of it. It just felt so, but that I do think that micro schools can do it for a lot cheaper by cutting through a lot of the bureaucracy.
So
By being leaner.
I would say that you're just simply by the fact of what a bureaucracy is, I think you're right. And based off of cheaper, more expensive, I don't know if that's actually the more relevant question, is more economical. A lot of decisions we make are more economical, require more upfront cash investments. And so cheaper might be the wrong way to think about it. Certainly, I think that if you can't make the argument that your school is an economical choice, it becomes really hard to justify it as a product.
Oh, no, you're competing against, at least in my set.
So it's a relatively
against private schools. So we have priced ourselves 20%, 30% less than private schools, and we can do that without losing our...
So you get the quality of those private schools at a more economic choice. So that's what a blue ocean is. So have you ever heard the term blue ocean? That's what, phenomenal book. That's what a blue ocean is. It's a place where you can compete against these established members in a room where they cannot in an ocean where they cannot come at you completely, as opposed to competing on price for the exact same service. You're competing in an open environment because you're able to do so in a way that those entrenched competitors cannot replicate. And so your strategy, your success is based off that, of what you can do that makes you different. And that's where that disruption comes in. The reason why you're angry, the reason why you see all of this opportunity is not because the public school system has worked really well. If there was a series of successes and growth and continued innovation, this conference might not exist. What instead, that anger that frustration comes from a recognition of what we call in academia institutional voids. The voids of where that education institution has developed a series of value propositions and where it is unable to satisfy those propositions. The voids of that school, and that's probably the source of your frustration. Those voids that those schools are filling. Now, from the outside looking in, when I tried to define those voids, they looked different. I looked at different states, I looked at different reports, I looked at different definitions, and it was hard for me to tell if there was any individual area that this group was focusing on. Some of the work that I looked at really looked more at where these hybrid schools really look more like private schools. They seem to be designed as private schools, licensed as private schools, and competing as private schools in that institutional environment. A lot of other reports, a lot of other states seemed like hybrid schools was essentially homeschools, right? It was mostly in the same conversation as homeschools. There was some kind of in-school instruction, maybe or in some cases, more like social networks, where the hybrid aspects was essentially socially integrated homeschoolers who had some outside of homeschool, maybe sports program, maybe social program, maybe academic program, but it was essentially a social network more than it was an industry of schools. So my assumption there, just from reading that, from trying to understand this, is that as an industry, you're in a new spot. You're in the Wild West. You are in what's that? You're early adopters. You're first movers. What that means on the downside is you likely don't have a lot of successful role models. Now, you might have personal role models, and I really hope you do. Role models are very important personally. But when I'm talking about an industry role model, I'm talking about that winning team, that winning company that figured it out, that then creates the best practices, creates the norms of an entire industry, and you're in the preliminary parts of that. You're seeding those best practices right now. That's an exciting point to be in, because it means you have the chance to create something brand new. You have the chance to actually define what it means for yourself and to own that definition, to own that value that you're creating, and it gives you a chance for actually disrupting that landscape and correcting these voids. This is not, and so when I approach this topic, my thought of where family businesses can help comes from this idea that when we're facing these institutional voids, the ways that we fill institutional voids, the ways that businesses in particular fill institutional voids and create institutional social value, is not by using the tools of that system. It's by using the tools of your local systems. If we think about where, particularly in economically deprived areas, where there's not a lot of institutional support, families, households, and communities provide those functions. In places where government cannot help, so families, households, and communities provide that function around the world. And you're facing a similar situation right now, where the way that you're going to find help is not from using the same tools of these already crumbling institutions, but by identifying your own localized ways to create value, create deep, replicable value, and then once you know how to do that, expand that out to see what's relevant to those around you who can learn from you, and what you can do to keep moving that forward.
How are you defining family?
So that's a great question. It's a good question for us. So being economically trained, most of the time when I define family, I'm either talking about a household unit or I'm talking about a biological social network. I will tell you that those are measures that were developed because of how easy they are to measure. They're empirically relevant. the function of family can be found in community areas, can be found through social networks of individuals with shared experiences, through faith-based networks. Tons. The idea of what a family is very expansive. How we get to study them, households and biological networks. Yes.
On your last point here, you seem to be hinting at when you're fully grown, so to speak, you have to transition your strategy to a new strategy.
Yes. Yes, I would say that's true.
And then that new strategy is figuring out what you've done that isn't a solved problem in the rest of the world and exporting that. Is that what it is?
Or identifying where you're creating value that's relevant to the same problems facing others, and then expanding that approach, which sometimes looks different. Luckily, it's hard to think about, right? It's a complicated process. Luckily, we've got models to help, and so that's and so you don't have to think about this yourself. Business schools do. There's a lot of things business schools could probably do better. But one of the things that we do really well is we model strategic behavior. So I'm going to give you a couple ideas. And again, I'm not pulling any punches. I'm coming at this as though you're interested in developing a formal business strategy. Go ahead.
I think one piece that's really important is a lot of us created these schools for our kids.
Yes.
Right? So like in my case, well, I guess not specific, I can talk about what we've done. But both of my kids are on our payroll.
Well, better family business the other.
Yeah. And, how we grow is based on what they are interested in, not what I'm interested in.
Yeah.
Right? And so as I talk to other, 95% of our families at our school are actually entrepreneurs themselves. It's just how we gravitate to each other. And one thing we've all been talking about is, the selling, the legacy piece, and making sure that, the 5-year-olds and the 7-year-olds are involved in the business decision conversations around the kitchen table.
Yeah.
Right? Are we buying a new, like in our case, are we buying a new horse for the program? Right? Are we buying a new trailer? Are we, expanding this program? And really getting their input in a meaningful way. And sometimes there isn't always a, this is going to add, $500 to the bottom line. It's more, okay, we're intrinsically, engaging this other family member in a meaningful way and providing, that educational value, that business value, and then maybe, when I don't want to do it anymore, we've created something that they're actually somewhat interested in, instead of like, well, my mom started this thing 20 years ago, and I want to go be a doctor. Which they can go be doctors if they want to, right?
Well, and they might still they'll still use that knowledge to become the best doctors they can become. The knowledge doesn't go away.
But I feel like a lot of owners, just in business in general, and I don't know what happened 30 years ago, where we're just like, our kids are over here, we're building our business right here, and we don't incorporate those conversations
So that's
enough.
That approach, right? And so that approach of bringing those children in, young children, into those conversations and making them familiar. If you took that to a boardroom, it would be dysfunctional. It would. I mean, not even like it shouldn't be. I'm not saying we should bring kids into boardrooms. It's set up for something else. In your case, and in family business cases, that's not the problem. Those kids are actually part of your key stakeholders. You're generating your business outcomes, investing with their future in mind. That's the whole point of an owner strategy, is taking those owner goals. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't want to. I almost did not come to the session after hearing you this morning because I thought your focus was only about family. But I don't think a family focused. Well, I won't say that. I think you could retitle this is, if you've been in education for 10 or 15 years, you probably feel that you cannot operate a for-profit business around schools. But it's possible to do it. In fact, it's necessary to do it because that will give you the mindset to grow and develop a business that works. And so I think what I experienced, and I ran a nonprofit for many years in education, a charter school, is that if I stayed with a nonprofit board, we would still be deciding what building we're going into. Rather than me as the sole owner, I get to decide that quickly and move quickly. and can scale quicker.
That authoritarian decision.
And approaching investors.
Very family.
And approaching investors with this strategy.
Yeah.
So I just hope for anyone else in the room who's thinking, someone told me, education needs to be do good and be poor. That's not necessary. In fact, you need to do good, and you can only do good with capital. That's one.
I mean, you're speaking to a business professor, so I agree. That is, the market tells us what's success, and the market tells us what's failing a little bit, and we rely on market indicators, maybe not as blindly, but we definitely need those.
I guess, but just to kind of offer an alternative perspective, I think there are families that are very non-authoritarian, first of all, and I think they can thrive on kind of creating a culture of consensus in a way that is, it may move a little bit slower, but it's not bureaucratic.
Yeah.
And so I think it also depends on what your metrics are for success. Is success rapid growth, or is it creating a culture that's distinctive and meaningful and cultivating curiosity and wonder and all those nice things as well? So I think there's a little bit of a tension there.
Well, and if I'm ever given this impression as though strategy's only for a certain kind of business or only for a certain kind of family, please don't let me do that. That's not at all the lessons that I'm trying to go here. I'm actually, if anything, trying to really expand this approach and expanding definitions of family and expanding understand and trying to break a lot of my work doesn't follow a dichotomy of profit or nonprofit because we've talked so much about social value creation, community outcomes, economic development. Those have the nonprofits can generate a lot of economic good through ways other than profit. So there's a lot of labels here that I might not be sensitive to, and honestly, I don't know if they're super relevant. What I think remains relevant is the fit of making sure that those families and those schools are realistically looking at their situation and making decisions from that basis, making informed decisions based off of where they currently have the capability to do that. Some families are really tight and intertwined. Some might not have that. And so the idea is not to fit your family into this mold. That wouldn't work. It's nothing that I would say would help you fit that family into the mold. But to be able to realistically and soberly look at your situation and identify your capabilities and your opportunities. This isn't new. This isn't something you have to train yourself to do. This is us as primates. We were doing this before we were probably people, right? We were talking about norms of exchange and reciprocity. And the interesting part and so this is from studies of Coolering economics, all the way back from the 1920s. Malinowski for the academics of the room. And when we look at economics from this perspective, we don't see this idea of for-profit, non-profit, those dichotomies shift apart. What we see is norms of exchange extending as our social groups extend. Everything I teach in my classes, if you come get an MBA from Kennesaw State, you'll have me teach your strategy class, and everything we teach in that strategy class assumes negative reciprocity. What do we call negative reciprocity in business? Profit. That's what profit is. You created something that cost this much. You sold it for this much. The difference is that negative reciprocity. When you're dealing with members of your own household, profit looks different. You don't need profit from that transaction. You don't need profit from that exchange. You can forward that profit through generalized outputs. You can pay back, in the right family, you can pay back your mom's loan to you by giving that forward to your brother, or something like that. That's what generalized household reciprocity means. And it's where families and where family businesses have resources that no one else does. It's where no other corporate entity, no nonprofit board, nobody is able to tap into household norms of exchange besides people who share a household. Maybe that's a biological family, not necessarily though. It's this idea of what what types of exchanges and outcomes you're pursuing through your decision making. So if you're bringing your family in, and if you were saying, well, we're bringing our kids in and they're as low as 5, and I'm getting them a salary and I'm teaching them about contracts and I'm telling them how to be a better worker, well, that's a weird way to do it, right? You would want to hopefully manage those family members as family members, and that's the lessons here. And so when we remember that anthropology of it, then we get to make strategic decisions that are more informed. And that's where I'm going to go from here. And I'm going to dump you into the deep end because I don't know how else to do it. And I'm going to talk to you about transaction cost economics. Because yes, I totally agree. Because that's how you're going to identify where those areas, those capabilities that you can invest in are. The whole point of transaction cost economics is creating value. Knowing where your value has been created, knowing where you're spending resources in ways that don't get value created, being able to model the contracts and relationships of your business. When you're approaching a new opportunity, what that does is it gives us, and I'm going to make this bigger in a little bit, but what it does is it gives you a chance of thinking through opportunities in ways that allow you to prioritize outcomes that are the best for you, that are the best along your ownership strategy. This means, yes, being able to identify some of these key areas, such as being able to even identify a strategic resource gap. That means you're in a mature enough business that you see an opportunity, a real, true opportunity, capital O opportunity, not just something you can do, but where a place in the market or a technology or an industry where your school, your business wants to be, should be, it needs to be. And that gap is how you pursue that gap, how you pursue that opportunity is going to tell you what kind of business you are and what kind of values that you pursue. We do that by understanding our own internal resources, because if you make decisions without understanding your own capabilities, if you let other people tell you what you're good at, if you let other bodies tell you where you're thriving, you will only ever thrive in that model. It works in some cases. It's harder for entrepreneurs. It's harder when you're trying to be innovative. And then being able to understand how you can actually acquire external resources through supplier relationships, through collaborations, maybe by merging and collaborating and coordinating entire school districts, but schools. So let's talk about that. This is more of a reference guide. Let's talk through the actual, what time are we at? Yeah, I got like 3 minutes. So let's talk through it. The biggest thing here is this first step. So being able to, one, identify a strategic resource gap, that means that you're in a mature enough point in your business where you can take a breath, you can look back, and you can see where you're headed. The goal of that business, the goal of pursuing that opportunity is in this vertical line right here. Being able to identify where your relevant capabilities are to create value for your students, for your parents, for your community members in general, whatever they may be, your stakeholders, whatever those stakeholders are, is going to come from you being able to identify what relevant internal resources you have that are underlying, anteceding your success, and then investing in them and developing them to be as big as they can be. And that is, I know there's a big model here, but the lesson of this is first, build what you can. Build where you can, because as soon as you break that apart, as soon as you no longer have relevant resources, what that means is that's when you're diversifying. That's when you're pursuing novel opportunities outside of your normal business. That's when you're needing partners. That's when you're needing growth. That's when you're needing everything else. And you want to give yourself the best springboard as possible before reaching that. Businesses, for-profit, non-profit, somewhere in between, that diversify too soon, that jump into partnerships before they're ready, before they know what their own worth is individually, they fail. Very reliably do poor. And so being able to focus on this internal development is so important because it gives you that basis of the best business you can be. And then, only then, can you pursue novel external opportunities that are unrelevant to your current resources. Maybe you want to have a whole new wing. Maybe you want to go from being a certain grade range to a different grade range. Maybe you want to go into a STEM specialized field, and you need to partner with somebody for that. How you partner with those people effectively while maintaining your own ownership, while maintaining your own control and your own power over your business is not intuitive. If you go into those relationships and start giving away equity and start taking on debt and just assuming that, yeah, I'm just going to hire this person to be my video software, I'm going to hire these people to do my HR, I'm going to hire out all of these capabilities and share all of my success with all of these people, that's you sharing your success. So you want to make sure that your allies, we use alliance there very strategically because they need to hopefully be true allies. And only once you've only once you've been through that process do you actually start looking at expanding, merging, and acquiring other businesses and other schools to expand that even farther. But until you have this internally developed model, until you have a solid business model that you get to own, then it's harder to expand because you're always going to be expanding with others' resources. Yes?
Where would scalability fit in there?
So scalability, in my mind, is going to be, this is your business, and so your business, normal organic business growth comes from how much you can build out your capabilities. How you can scale beyond that is going to come once you start expanding your network. And so so growth versus scale, right? Where they can be measured the same way, but growth is your organic internal growth that you can manage with your current structures. And in my mind, a scale is an exponential growth, and that comes from taking that same model, that value chain that you've developed, and putting it in as many other markets as possible, and that's when you start extending your relationship with partners.
So basically, this is the lean startup model.
Kind of. Well, I mean, I think that who's the trans? Williamson would be a little sad that you called it that, but yeah, essentially. Yeah, exactly. But what happens when you scale first? What happens when you rush to scale? You fail. And so the idea here is not to blow our minds with brand new strategy, but to remember that the fundamentals remain fundamental, whether you're talking about a family business, a mom and pop, a tech startup, or a school. The fundamentals are fundamental for a reason.
What's the best way to correct the course if you have diversified and substantially before you necessarily scaled and are in the process of scaling and creating those alliances so that you can scale, because before you couldn't scale because you didn't have the funding?
That is such a good question. So it's a hard question to answer. So let's see. So the simple one would be you leave and start another one, and you do what Steve Jobs did to Xerox, and you do which is you steal everything that's not built down. You say, actually, I'm going to be a better competitor than I am a better partner, and you do it again. So that's the lesson. If you think your partners are going in the wrong direction, you can either be okay with it, or if you're not, you leave and you take everything you can and you do it again. Better. That's the easy answer. The hard answer is you're actually legally wrapped up in these people. You might not be able to actually realistically do that. And so that's a harder question because it becomes a minimizing losses strategy rather than maximizing gains. And that's a different situation. And so what do? You minimize your losses. You minimize your losses. You fail as gracefully as you can so that you can sustain enough resources to try again. And being able to fail gracefully is an incredibly good skill of an entrepreneur. That is not a bad thing. Being able to fail gracefully, finding someone who can fail really well, that's who you want on your team.
All right.
Any questions? So we did, I don't think we have much time for it.
No, but I would like to point out, if you want to flip to the last slide, on your all's handout, if you all are interested in learning a little bit more about ownership strategy, we do have a more immersive workshop on it. You feel free to scan the QR code or go to familyenterprisecenter.com. And you can check that out. It's a multi-module curriculum, and you can look at what that looks like. And if you have questions, shoot one of us an email. Our contact information is also on that page. If you're interested in getting the slides from today's presentation, I also recommend going to that website because that's where our contact information is. Shoot us an email. We will be happy to give you the slides, and if you want to talk about any of this further, y'all have been fun to talk to, so we'd like to talk some more. And then lastly, if you're like, well, maybe that's a little much, but I am kind of interested in staying in touch, on the other side, we have a newsletter that you can subscribe to. It's once a month. This most recent one was talking about how to preserve your legacy in the community, so very relevant to some of the things that you all are working on. Y'all have been great. If you want to talk to us anymore, we'll be around for lunch, and we would love to chat with you all. But otherwise, thank you for having us. FamilyEnterpriseCenter.com.